Story 1. I worked for a federal program. My boss hired her sister without disclosing to supervisors that the employee was a relative, a disclosure required by the program. My boss then paid her sister twice the usual rate, and the sister logged many extra hours she had not actually worked. I only found out because my boss insisted I enter the timesheet data for her, saying to take any questions to her supervisor, and then left for the day. I noticed the discrepancy immediately and went to my boss's supervisor to report the issue with the timesheet compared to the schedule and to ask what I should do. The fact that the employee was my boss's sister was news to the supervisor. The discrepancy triggered an investigation that uncovered widespread misuse of government funding. My boss lost her job, the Federal Bureau of Investigation became involved, and she eventually faced substantial fines and prison time. Knowing what I know now, I would report her again. Story 2. A coworker would always talk about how Jessica and I were going places, or Jesse and I went somewhere, or Jess and I got up to this and that. One day I ran into him and his wife in public. He introduced her only as my wife. I said, "Oh, Jessica, it's nice to meet you. I have heard so much about you." His wife's name was not Jessica. I feel nothing about it. He should not have cheated on his wife. But if he was going to, he should not have spent years telling me about Jessica and then introduced his wife only as my wife. Story 3. I caught my brother-in-law sexually abusing his 9-year-old daughter. He killed himself afterward to avoid going to jail. I have no regrets. He had been sexually abusing her since she was 5. She will be 18 this year. Her life is 100 times better with him gone. I am grateful I caught him because we would not have known otherwise. He had threatened her and her brothers into silence. I was only 21 years old when I caught him. It was very traumatic to witness, and even more so for her. But she is safe, and that is all that matters to me. Story 4. I accidentally stumbled upon a $2.5 million Ponzi scheme while working in finance. The person later died by suicide after federal investigators became involved. Story 5. I photograph and film weddings. At one wedding, about half of the guests spoke a language I was not fluent in. This was before artificial intelligence translation tools existed. The mother of the bride said something derogatory about the groom's mother in her native language, and I included it in the wedding video because she smiled when she said it. It turned out the groom's mother spoke multiple languages. Story 6. My good friend was scheduled to have surgery when an aneurysm was discovered. I was at the hospital with her and her family, and right before she was taken away, she handed me her phone and said she wanted me to keep it until she was in recovery. She died on the operating table. She had been a heavy smoker for more than 20 years, and the doctors could not find any viable tissue to graft to save her. I turned her phone back on and handed it to her husband. About 24 hours after her death, we discovered that she had been having an affair for years and had been embezzling money from the business to provide for her boyfriend. She had also signed a car over to him that he was supposedly still paying for. It broke all of us, and I still have unresolved feelings toward her for putting me in that position. I think she knew I would figure it out and expected me to cover for her. I love and miss you, Amy, but you were a piece of shit for doing that to your family. Story 7. We kept having boxes of parts go missing when they were shipped to customers and manufacturers, totaling about $20,000. I was in charge of operations, so I had to figure it out and keep it quiet because we did not know whether one of our employees was involved. I installed a global positioning system tracker in a box and had to ship it about 5 times between 2 of our locations until I figured it out. It was an orchestration between one of our employees and a Federal Express driver. Human Resources fired our employee and notified Federal Express, which also fired its employee. Our company did not press civil charges, and the district attorney declined to prosecute because the evidence was very thin. I thought nothing of it for about 2 years, but then a fellow employee sent me a news article saying the former Federal Express employee had recently died from a drug overdose while homeless. I do not know whether solving our theft problem directly caused that outcome, but I am sure it contributed to their downward spiral. Story 8. Many years ago, I went to the harness races and invited a young man named Alan to come along. He was about 17 and had never even seen a horse before. For each race, I told him what I thought, and he either bet $2 or skipped the race. $2 mattered to him. In a late race, there was a horse named Minya Mitzvah. He got excited and said, "A Jewish horse, I have to bet him." I warned him the horse was terrible. The horse went off at 30-1. It was early winter and a heavy fog obscured the far side of the track. They disappeared into the fog, and even the announcer said, "Your guess is as good as mine." After a long time, the first horse emerged alone. We waited for the rest of the field, which eventually appeared, but the leader was well in front. Who knows what happened in that fog? We could now see the colors, and sure enough, it was Minya Mitzvah. The horse cruised home, and Alan revealed he had bet $10. Suddenly, he had more money than he had ever seen in his life, and his brain was doing cartwheels. He was hooked. From that day on, he became a degenerate gambler, always chasing that high. Years later, he told me he could not stop. Even if I gave him $1 million, he would be broke in a year. All because of a Jewish horse and my casual invitation. Story 9. This is not my story, but that of an old coworker. And it is timely because today is September 11th. He was a manager at a different company and supervised a team member who was not meeting expectations. He gave her many chances and opportunities, but she continued to fail at the job. He eventually decided to fire her. She was heartbroken. She loved the job and the company and begged to keep it, but he refused. A few weeks later, she received a job interview across the country and needed to fly out. She was on one of the planes that struck the Twin Towers on her way to that interview. He had no control over what happened, but he felt deep regret for a long time, wondering if he had waited a few more weeks to fire her and delayed her job search. She might not have been on that plane. That story always sticks with me. Story 10. A coworker went on a road trip to Seattle. I jokingly asked him to bring back some heroin. I was not a user and did not actually want any. It was clearly a joke. The day he was supposed to be back, he called and said he was running late and might not be there on time. I was not concerned when he did not show up at the scheduled time. An hour later, I called him again. There was no answer. He did not come in that night. He called the next day. He had been speeding excessively to get to work, still in another state, and got pulled over. He had a small, personal amount of marijuana in the car, which was not good. The real problem was that he had a very small amount of tar heroin he was bringing me back as a joke. That joke ruined his life. He had to move to that state in hopes of avoiding a charge for transporting drugs across state lines. Because there were two different types of drugs, they charged him with dealing. It did not end in jail time, but he received a long probation and had to live in a bad place for years. I apologized to him and felt terrible. He never once blamed me or showed any animosity. He knew it was his choice and that he had made a mistake. I still felt bad about it. Story 11. I was looking after my friend's apartment while they were on vacation. There was building work outside and someone hit the toilet downpipe, which broke the ceramic bowl and flooded the bathroom. I cleaned it all up, then complained to building management and asked for the toilet to be replaced before they returned, which set off a series of events that led to their eviction. It turned out they were illegally subletting without knowing it. I felt terrible at the time, but they ended up moving back to Australia because of it and are living well there, so I'm okay with it now. Story 12. I work in human resources. When I was new and naive, I received an employee home address change request. I could not read the handwriting and wanted to be sure the new address was correct, so I called his home. His wife answered and said, "What are you talking about?" A few days later, the employee told me he had not yet told his wife that he was moving out. Story 13. I unknowingly introduced a close friend to the most toxic person I have ever met. My college buddy Chris, a pseudonym, and I both had a Thursday afternoon off and decided to go to a happy hour. It was early. There were only about a dozen people in the bar, including us and a group of 3 women. One of the women was exactly Chris's type. Tall, thin, dark-haired, outgoing, but he was shy and did not have the courage to start a conversation. 30 minutes and some liquid courage later, I started chatting with the women and introduced Chris to the tall, dark-haired woman Veronica, a pseudonym for this story. She and her friends were all single, our age, in a nursing program at a crosstown school and seemed like nice people. Chris, I, and the women ended up staying until the bar closed that night, And by 10 in the evening, Chris and Veronica were kissing passionately and acting like the rest of us did not exist. I was happy for him but got nervous when they left together and her friends started joking about not knowing what he was in for. He was an adult and I did not want to rain on his parade. After that night, Chris effectively disappeared. The only times I would see him were in class or at that same bar with Veronica. He seemed off, but he refused to talk about it and insisted he was happy. Veronica, on the other hand, refused to let him out of her sight and would make him wait outside the bathroom for her. It turned out Veronica was a sociopath, a narcissist, and a con artist who drained Chris both emotionally and financially. Highlights include fake pregnancies, forcing him to cut off friends, demanding he drop classes to fit her schedule, and manipulating him into paying her rent, bills, and lifestyle. Chris came from an upper-middle-class family with whom he was very close, and they had legitimate concerns. I had assumed he was head over heels and ignoring us, but I knew something was wrong when his mother called me to ask if I had spoken to him recently. He had drained his bank account and began accumulating significant debt on the credit card he shared with his parents, buying extremely expensive jewelry, makeup, and clothes for Veronica. That was enough for his parents to drive 4 hours from their hometown to stage a mini-intervention. In the end, Chris had to drop out of school, move back home, and his parents obtained a restraining order against Veronica. His parents forced him to get a job to pay off the $3,000 he had accrued, and he forfeited his partial football scholarship. I lost touch with him after he moved back home, but I sometimes wonder how his life would have turned out if we had not gone to happy hour at Kelly's that Thursday. Story 14. I was a volunteer firefighter a while back. The pager went off for a medical assist. We often had to help the ambulance with patient lifts and so on. I gave my spot on the truck to the rookie we had in training, thinking he could help and get the mental boost of being on the team. I shouldn't have. The patient was an older man who had been smoking in his wheelchair, wearing synthetic clothing, and using oxygen through his nose. He caught fire. It was a lift to get the patient onto the helicopter. He did not survive the flight. The rookie had to see that as his first call. He left the brigade shortly after. Some things you really can never unsee, and he was just a high schooler trying to do something good for the community. I hope he is okay these days. I've seen a lot that will never leave me either, but I have come to accept that this is how life and death can be. I was prepared the moment the helmet was on for whatever came at me. The kid's first experience was probably that, and he was unprepared for it. Story 15. A friend asked me about someone who had just started a new job. The person with the new job was ecstatic because it was a huge opportunity in an oversaturated field. It was essentially their big break. I told the friend they were enjoying it and handling it well. When asked if they were stressed, I mentioned they had some friction with a coworker but were managing it. I did not know the person asking was friends with that coworker. They used what I said to help get my friend fired for creating a toxic work environment. It was petty and ruined the trajectory of my friend's career. For years later, they are still struggling to find meaningful employment. Story 16. I took video and pictures for the yearbook at a high school assembly. It was some sort of drug abuse resistance education event, a drug prevention program featuring strongmen ripping phone books and performing other feats of strength. I took the footage home in the late 1990s to review the tape and get the pictures developed. My mother saw it and asked for copies because she had paid to have the photographs and the film digitized. The school would reimburse her. No problem. It turned out she worked with one of the performers. She was in human resources, he was in another department. He was on workers' compensation and receiving disability benefits, saying he could not work or move meaningfully and was almost claiming to be partially bedridden. That was not the case. Sorry, random strong man. Story 17. I suggested to a young man I knew at school that he considered joining the military and using the Servicemen's Readjustment Act later in life after he was not accepted to college or university. He thought it was a good idea and enlisted. His convoy hit an improvised explosive device on his first deployment. He survived but has a long list of health problems. I feel terrible for suggesting it. Story 18. When I was in high school, a friend and I were trying to go to a Major League Baseball game. It was before smartphones and his car did not have a global positioning system, so we got lost. We lost touch for a couple of years before seeing him at a house party. We laughed about how we had gotten lost. It turned out he had not told his parents where we were going. His mother saw the toll bills from that day and assumed his father was using the car to cheat on her. His father slept on the couch for a year before my friend realized our outing had been a contributing factor to their fights. When he told me the story, it seemed they had reconciled. I am sure the toll bill was not the only cause, but it was wild to learn that two kids on summer break, trying to go to a Major League Baseball game, helped trigger marital problems. Story 19. I divorced my ex-wife when I discovered her chronic cheating after years of dealing with her alcoholism. She immediately tried to get together with the man she had been cheating with. He was married with children. During a drunken fight between them, she called the police and filed a false report against him. She had tried the same thing with me previously, and it was proven false. In his intoxicated state, he panicked and killed himself. My ex showed no remorse and instead posted on social media seeking sympathy. Now 2 children have no father and a wife lost a terrible husband. I only feel bad for the surviving family. I have no doubt I saved my own life by leaving her rather than trying to work things out. In the following month, she deceived a man into marrying her, became pregnant, and bought a house. A year later, he contacted me on Facebook asking for divorce attorney advice and asking me to testify against her. She signed away her parental rights when she saw my name on the court paperwork. Story 20. I was once the instrument that stalled someone's career, but I do not feel entirely responsible. I was in therapy at a clinic and knew 2 friends who were therapists there. I also had a third friend who had just died by suicide. At the funeral, one of the people I knew from the mental health agency gossiped about private, confidential information she had snooped into in the deceased person's file. At my next therapy session, I was grieving and outraged about that breach of confidentiality. My therapist pressured me to reveal the gossiper's name, and I refused. 2 days later, I received a phone call from my second friend, a master of social work therapist at the clinic, who had no idea what had happened, as we had not spoken in about a year. She asked why she was being questioned and possibly disciplined over the gossip. I was forced to reveal who had been unprofessional. That ended her career. It was handled so discreetly that to this day she does not know I reported her. The incident happened in 1990. I have often thought about telling her, but I feel it is best to leave it as it is. She really did it to herself. Story 21. He was slacking off at work, never getting anything done and frequently calling in sick for phony reasons. I ended up doing all his work. Once, when he called in claiming a severe vomiting migraine and then posted on Facebook that he was at a concert, I reported him. They fired him a few weeks later, and because his wife refused to work, they eventually lost their house. Story 22. I work in a public library and, because of how our book hold system works, I once accidentally informed a man that he was likely getting a divorce. His wife had placed several do-it-yourself divorce books on hold and they had a shared library account. When I called their landline, the only number on the account, to tell them that their holds were ready for pickup, he answered. When I explained why I was calling, he asked what the book titles were. Without thinking, I rattled them all off. The Michigan Divorce Book, the Divorce Book, What Every Michigan Married Man or Woman Needs to Know, and a few others. There were 4 or 5 altogether, so it seemed pretty inevitable that he was headed for the single life. We do not typically share our patrons' private account information with anyone, including what books they have checked out or on hold, but if they are sharing an account with another person, we have no way of knowing which person on that account placed the hold. Sharing an account means that all the account information is available to everyone on the account. I know it is not my fault that he got a divorce, but that is a heck of a way to find out, and I do feel bad about it. Story 23. I told my girlfriend we should stop by Starbucks on our way to my work, and I bought her a tea for her sore throat. The lid came off and the tea spilled all over her. She was hospitalized for 2 weeks and underwent skin graft surgery. I am of no use to her. She is probably going to have permanent scarring. Story 24. 20 years ago, I was a computer technician at university. One day, a colleague told me she was reviewing a very interesting master's thesis and asked whether I could find some authors cited in the references. Back then, much material was either not online or not easily searchable, so that required some skill with search engines. I followed obscure links and found a copy of the article referenced in one of the chapters. The entire chapter was essentially a single citation. The student had only changed all the first-person I references, for example, I have researched became the author has researched, and so on. But that is not how it works. That happened on the eve of the thesis defense. It became a big scandal in the department. The student was expelled, but because they had formally finished their education, they could not repeat the year. To receive the master's degree, they would essentially have to begin studies in a different department. Of course, it was not my fault. Still, being instrumental in that person's downfall, even if deserved, made me feel quite strange. Story 25. When I was 15, my friends and I went to a Cincinnati Reds game at the old Riverfront Stadium with a large group of high schoolers. We snuck away from the group and convinced a man to buy us beer. When he handed us the beer, a plainclothes police officer approached, flashed his badge, and began asking questions. The man would not show his ID or answer questions, so the officer pulled out his handcuffs and a tussle began as he tried to detain him. We used the commotion to run back and rejoined our group in the upper seating on the opposite side of the stadium. I don't know if it ruined his life, but his buying beer for us certainly ruined his night, and I'm sure it cost him a lot in legal fees. I wish I could tell him I'm sorry. Story 26. I intervened when my close friends were suicidal, and they stopped being my friends. It ruined their lives at the time. Many years later, they are alive, seem to have good lives, and are married. I was not invited to the weddings. I tell myself it was worth it because it was the right thing to do, and at least they are alive. Story 27. My childhood best friend and I were making a silly plan to sneak out of my room at night. We tied some sheets together to make a rope movie style and lowered it out of my third-floor bedroom window. She volunteered to go first, and after she was fully out the window and dangling, the knots came loose. I watched her fall in slow motion, bounce off the water heater, and land on the grass. I ran outside, fully expecting her to be unconscious or worse, but she was surprisingly fine and already walking toward my front door. We swore to keep it secret and never told anyone because we were so embarrassed. We joked about it for a while afterward. We did a lot of dumb, dangerous things as kids. Over the years we have grown apart, and now as an adult she has developed significant mental difficulties she did not have before, including memory problems, social skill deficits, and impaired executive functioning. I think about her often, and I can't help but wonder whether falling from my window had something to do with it. Story 28. Years ago, while working at a hardware store, I knocked a full pallet of lime off a 20-foot-high shelf and came within inches of killing someone who had been standing there. I hopped off the forklift, grumbling about the mess I would have to clean up, and then saw the person. They were completely unharmed but pale with dilated pupils. I repeatedly apologized, but my words did not register. They simply walked out of the store. Story 29. I almost started a forest fire by accident once. I was burning a pile of brush and had not taken enough safety precautions. The wind began to gust and set the surrounding grass on fire. I kept putting the flames out, and each time the wind gusted they would reignite. I ran into the house, called the fire department, then returned outside with hoses, connecting several together to reach the fire. I got it out after about half an acre burned. The fire department arrived after it was out. The fire would have reached the trees before they got there. I felt terrible. My hands were blistered from digging and beating at the flames with a shovel. The grass looked green, but there was dead, dry grass beneath it. Combined with the wind, it was a nightmare. Story 30. I had a big move on a busy road a while ago. There were lots of moving parts. Permits, a shop downstairs, and reserved parking. It was an incredibly stressful amount of management. When the day came, my roommates and I were extremely stressed because if one thing went wrong, the whole house of cards would collapse. It seemed, however, to be smooth sailing. The only annoying thing was that cars kept parking in our reserve space before the moving vans arrived. Most had left phone numbers we could call, so we did, and they would usually move right before my dad was supposed to show up for cars parked in the reserve spot. They had left no numbers and their owners were nowhere in sight. There was no way for me to get any of these cars removed. To be clear, this meant there was nowhere for my dad to park the moving van on this busy road. If he could not park, we could not move my things, which were completely blocking the already narrow hallway and the first part of the stairwell. Moving my things back up 4 floors was out of the question. I had about 40 minutes to solve this, so I called the police. They showed up within 15 minutes, started writing fines, and told me they would get a tow truck. 30 minutes later, the tow truck arrived, along with a couple of the car owners. Big arguments broke out between the police and the owners. Suddenly, reinforcements arrived, about 6 more officers. Apparently, they had seen drugs lying in one of the illegally parked cars. The man appeared to work at the hookah bar across the street. The police detained him and waited an hour to get a warrant to search the hookah bar. Meanwhile, one officer was holding back traffic, including streetcars, in 2 directions so my dad could parallel park the van. Other bystanders were still arguing. It was chaotic, and I stood there extremely stressed about what was happening. Suddenly, one of the officers asked me if the sandwich place downstairs always had its outdoor seating out like that. That was also illegal, so they started addressing that. For people received substantial fines and towing costs. The sandwich place lost its outdoor seating, the hookah bar was closed, and I believe the man was arrested, all because they parked in my spot. Story 31. During my first year of university, I was sexually assaulted by another student living in my dorm. When I spoke out, 2 other women came forward with similar experiences. A few months later, the administration discovered he was cultivating illegal drugs in his room and removed him from residence. A couple of years later, an acquaintance told me he had been expelled, become involved in gambling, and committed suicide. I feel fine because I told the truth. Story 32. Not me, but my husband. He is the reason my parents are divorced. When my husband and I were engaged, I drove to work. When I arrived, instead of my car turning off like normal, it sounded like it had died. It let out its last breath and was gone. I called my fiancé. He drove over, had my car towed to a shop, and had it inspected. He did all this while I was at work. I later told my mom about it and she was floored. She asked, "You mean he just took care of it? He wasn't upset or irritated to have to deal with it? If that happened to me, your dad would take care of it. But he would be angry and find a way to blame me." My mom left my dad a week later. This was their second divorce. My mom saw everything so clearly that day. Story 33. I feel that if I hadn't moved out of state, my mother wouldn't have overdosed. That might even be true, but my life is good now and I couldn't have stayed there. It's a guilt I've lived with for 10 years. Story 34. It wasn't an accident, but I didn't know what the outcome would be when I filed a sexual harassment complaint against a high-level manager who worked in the corporate office of a grocery chain and was responsible for remodels. He lost his job and his retirement benefits. He was very close to retiring. He was harassing every young female associate, and another manager encouraged us to file the complaint. He got what he deserved. Story 35. I do not take full blame, but I did not help. I had a boss who was not a good manager. He often failed to come to work, was a raging alcoholic, and was a good old boy who did not understand why I was so good at my job in sales. He was a made man and was kept because of a connection with a high-level executive. He was on thin ice because he would regularly get wasted at company events and start fights. Still, he did advocate for me at times. When his boss came to town, who was also a poor manager but tolerated him, I told the superior exactly what was happening. I explained that he was failing his employees, that he did not work, and that he was drinking again. A week or 2 later, my boss was fired. A new manager came in who was only slightly better. A couple of years later, I heard my old boss, whom I probably helped get fired, died of liver disease at 43. The rumor was that he was begging to be allowed to die. A year later, the executive who always bailed him out also died. I am not sure of the cause. Story 36. I went to high school with a quiet kid named Jay. He sat at the back of the class and wore the same surplus military jacket every day, a little greasy. A few times we spoke and discovered we had a lot in common. He was into video games and nerd culture, and so was I. I took him under my wing and introduced him to my friends. We played Dungeons and Dragons and personal computer games. I did my best to include him because before that his only friends were his younger brother and a few others. My best friend and I were already smoking weed and Jay knew about it. One day he asked to meet us after school and try weed for the first time. I was stoked. He seemed to be breaking out of his shell, talking to people and smiling. So we met up and he smoked weed for the first time after school. It went downhill rapidly after that. Turned out Jay had an addictive personality. Within 6 months of this quiet, reserved kid smoking weed, he was ordering any research chemicals he could from the internet. This was before the laws around research chemicals were tightened, so it was legal and easy to order things like entire vials of 25I and other substances. He started frying himself and acting erratically. He even dropped out of school before his senior year. Keep in mind, he had had very good grades before this. He kept his head down and did well in school. After high school, he got into stimulants. He began by abusing the Vyvanse he was prescribed, which seemed to amp him up. Then he moved on to cocaine, which I also used with him. I wish I had not, because I had no idea how far it would go. He quickly moved on to methamphetamine. One night, I stayed at his house with a buddy and woke up on his couch around 7 in the morning to him and my friends standing over me literally smoking meth out of a gas station pipe. I was probably breathing it in. When I asked what they were doing, they said they were about to clean the house. I was flabbergasted. I got up and drove myself home, dangerously tired. I barely made it without passing out, but I could not stay there any longer. I stopped talking to him after that. The whole thing gave me a foreboding feeling I could not shake. Turns out I was right. He started robbing convenience stores at gunpoint with a shotgun he bought at Base Pro Shop using his employee discount. He even had the other buddy who could not drive, had no license and no experience be his getaway driver. Somehow he never got caught, as far as I know. Later it came out he was into loli and other disturbing material. He never got caught for that either. I was told he ran a magnet over every hard drive he had because he knew he might be in trouble. A few people tried to talk to the police about it, but it never went anywhere. He has been accused of sexually assaulting his nephews, but that also never went anywhere. I washed my hands of him years ago. I know it is not entirely my fault and that someone else might have introduced him to drugs, and that I did not steer him toward the extreme things he later did, but I still feel partly to blame. Story 37. When I was a punk teen, I left home and was living in a men's mission in Hawaii. I had no driver's license and no car, but I loved surfing and had a drug habit. I paid a friend of a friend $50 to borrow a car, only to be arrested later for possession of a stolen car. Yes, it was stolen and for drug charges. I refuse to say who I got the car from or how I got it. I am not a snitch, but when my property was inventoried, they found a slip of paper with a name, address, phone number, and a note that said "Go incognito." I had written that down because the friend said it when he was telling me about the man I was borrowing the car from. In other words, the man was crooked. Be safe and be quiet. They used that information to investigate him, learned he had been running a chop shop, and he went to prison. Years later, I was clean, got my life together, started working in law enforcement, and attended a funeral. The man was also at that funeral. He came to me and said he held no hard feelings, that he had found God in prison and changed his life, provided a small measure of closure for both of us, and was really nice. Story 38. Working in child protective services for a while, many people say I have ruined their lives. Admittedly, I have in some cases, but I do not think someone should be allowed to continue living as normal after sexually abusing a child or torturing multiple children. For most families, I was able to obtain in-home resources to help. A few cases haunt me. I wish I had been more experienced, supported, and knowledgeable earlier in my career so I could have helped them. One man reportedly shot himself after being confronted with evidence of years of sexually abusing a child with a disability. I do not believe he shot himself. I suspect a family member, but I am not disclosing details. That family was shattered. There was no possible happy outcome. Story 39. In high school, after the talent show, We were putting away stage set pieces and stored one item under a stairwell. The piece was oblong and protruded into the walkway. It was not a high-traffic area, and we were in a rush, so we left it there. Later, I heard that a friend tripped on it, injuring her face and requiring dental work. I do not think anyone ever connected me to placing it there. Story 40. My sister-in-law dated a Nepalese man for more than a year. I was talking to a friend about her and mentioned the boyfriend. She said her cousin had also dated a Nepalese man. I said he worked in engineering, and she said her cousin's boyfriend did, too. I asked his name and it was the same. We checked photos and it was the same man. He had been dating her cousin for 3 years and was talking about marriage and children. The cousin was devastated to learn he had been cheating on her for more than a year. Story 41. I have not thought about this in quite some time. This was back in the early days of the internet. I was chatting with people online and started talking to a girl. We hit it off. Things turned flirty and then moved into the real world. We discovered we were only a couple of hours apart, and she was coming to my area in a couple of weeks. Perfect. We set up a date and had a great time. A couple of days later, I received a message from her husband. Apparently, I was not the only person she was visiting. He was hurt and disappointed by her actions. He wanted to reach out to let us know what was happening. He said he was divorcing her and that I might be called into court. Did I feel bad about it? A little guilty, but this was on her too. She had not been forthcoming about her marriage. Should I have asked more questions? I was a lonely and horny 20-something and did not give it much thought when someone wanted to meet. Story 42. I worked at Blockbuster in the early 2000s. The rule was that one account could have a card and one authorized person who could rent for the account holder. A woman came to the counter with 3 children and a pile of kids' movies. She handed me the card and said the name on it was Harry. I pulled up the account and saw a note saying Julie was authorized to rent for him. I asked, "Julie?" She stopped dead and said, "I'm Kim." She left the movies, walked out with her children, and I saw her get into a minivan with a man. I could hear her screaming through the vehicle and the wall. Story 43. A few years ago, I accidentally leaked a private message at work that caused my colleague to be fired. I didn't mean to, but it still haunts me. Story 44. I was pissed because a child in 5th grade kept copying my tests, so I told the teacher. After I deliberately failed a test and they compared answers, it was determined that the child had indeed been copying from me. The child was tested, found to be illiterate, and held back a grade. I do not really feel bad because fuck that guy, and I hope he now knows how to read. Story 45. I accidentally outed a school friend after I stumbled across his photo on a gay dating website. I told my brother about it over the phone, not knowing he had me on speaker. His roommate told everyone, and when I heard her in the background, I knew the secret was out. I was devastated that day. This happened 20 years ago. I do not know if I ruined his life, but his girlfriend left him and his friends learned he was seeking sexual encounters on a gay dating website. It was not cool. I still feel very bad. Story 46. This is a fun one. I thought I was doing the right thing. Back in high school, I had a group of friends that I used to eat lunch with every day. We all lived within 2 or 3 blocks of each other, so it made sense that we hung out both in and out of school. We will call one of the guys Dan. One day at lunch, a girl from my Reserve Officers Training Corps class came up to me with her boyfriend and asked to talk. I asked what was on her mind. She said, "Why do you hang out with that guy?" I said, "Because he's my friend." She said, "You know he sexually assaulted me, right?" I said, "No. No one had ever said anything. Why didn't anybody tell me?" She said she did not know and thought everyone else knew. I asked if she had reported it. She said no because she did not think the police would do anything. I asked when it happened. She said about a month earlier. Later that day, I was walking to another class and talking to a classmate about the situation and how conflicted I felt about whether to report it. She made the decision for me by pushing me into the office of the Reserve Officers Training Corps program leader as we walked past. I almost fell. I told him everything I knew about the conversation. He listened intently, took notes, and said, "Don't worry. I'll take care of everything." 2 or 3 days passed and nothing happened. Shortly after that, I was called into the principal's office with the Reserve Officers Training Corps program leader and two police officers. They were extremely kind. They said they had interviewed everyone involved and that everyone, including the girl, agreed that nothing had happened and that no one had been sexually assaulted. I was really scared because I thought I was going to get in trouble for making a false report or lying, even though I believed what I had been told. I was a kid. They told me I was not in trouble and that I had done the right thing by coming forward. It later came out that she had lied about that and many other things, and she eventually left the state because she could not continue at the school due to bullying. I do not feel bad for what I did, but I certainly did not mean for that to happen. I thought I was doing the right thing. Story 47. I don't think it was his life, but it cost him his job. He said he was taking bereavement leave because a relative had died. The next day he was off, and I worked directly with his sister-in-law, who was not off. I offered my condolences. She asked what I was talking about. I told her about the relative. She checked her phone, texted, and said nobody had died. I thought, oh no, and walked away. It started a large investigation because the company pays employees for bereavement leave. He was fired for fraud. Story 48. I was at a friend's house with my boyfriend when we were 14. My friend and I are white and my boyfriend was black. Her racist father saw him kiss me and told us to leave. My friend badly wanted me to stay, but it wasn't my house, so I couldn't insist. Now I wish I'd asked her to come with us. Maybe it would have made a difference. We left. Her father became violent. Her mother came home from work to find him with his hands around her throat. The mother separated from him, and she and my friend lived somewhere else for a while. Eventually my friend dated an older man and became pregnant, so he would have to marry her. He married her and joined the army. She had 2 children and later divorced him. The last time I talked to her, she was dating a man who was nice except when he was drinking. She has a different last name now and probably married him. Her daughter has been in and out of the court system. Her son died of a heroin overdose. He had also been dealing. Her grandson is in prison for murder. Edit. I appreciate the kindnesses, but I doubt I'll ever shake the feeling that I had a hand in how things turned out. Story 49. There was a guy from school I grew up with. We were in most classes together from kindergarten through the end of high school. We were not friends, perhaps only acquaintances. We never really talked but were friendly. When I was about 25, he reached out on Facebook. We talked for a bit before he asked if he could couch surf while he got his life together. I gave an uncertain answer because I wanted to help, but my younger sister, who knew his sibling, warned me not to. I never had an issue with him in the past, but I trusted my sister's judgment and eventually told him no. About a year later, I read a news article that he had committed suicide. I know I am not the reason for what happened, but I still feel guilty about it. Story 50. I did not cause it directly, but I had an office mate and friend who owed me money. After I resigned, we lost touch. Every few months I sent a friendly payment reminder, and she always replied with an excuse and a promise to pay. One morning I texted her because I needed the money and, frustrated that it had been more than a year, I sent some harsh words. She did not respond. Later that day, I saw a post from a mutual friend on Facebook saying he would miss her. I learned she had committed suicide that noon. She had developed a gambling addiction around the time I resigned and owed many people money. Her life fell apart in less than a year, leaving her children behind. Do not gamble. Story 51. A girlfriend's father died in Vietnam, but she did not receive benefits. In the very early days of the internet, she found his military records and discovered that her parents had divorced before his death. Her mother had been lying for years. Oops. Story 52. We had an incredible, dedicated colleague and father who was made redundant. He had been with the company for decades and was shuffled between departments whenever his role was automated. We all loved him and wanted him around, so he filled any team gaps. Then I opened my mouth. We were being paid a pittance because our roles were originally entry-level, but we had modernized the system so much that my staff had advanced expertise in our software and were effectively irreplaceable. I was the change manager and super user, so I knew everything. I threatened to quit if my team were not paid more. They wanted to keep me, so they found the budget for our modest raises by eliminating him. They even gave me a bonus for it. I bought his family a table tennis set. I hope he found another job that makes him happy every day, but I still feel terrible. Story 53. I used to have a friend in middle school who knew I liked him, but he identified as straight. I will call him Luke for this story. We got handsy one day in middle school toward the end of the year, but nothing happened beyond that. About a year later, after our freshman year of high school, we met up again. Luke and I dated that summer until he decided to break things off. Things were getting sort of serious for him, and it made him nervous having a boyfriend. He specifically said he did not know how to explain to girls at his school that he was already seeing someone else. We stopped dating and eventually stopped talking. A couple of years later, Luke reached out to catch up and see how I was doing. I was in a serious relationship with someone I thought I would be with for a while, though that did not happen because my then boyfriend was a sociopath. In the midst of catching up, Luke dropped a bombshell. He told me he was engaged, which I was happy about. He also said he regretted breaking up with me back then and that he had never had feelings for anyone like he did for me and had not since. He explained the real reason he broke up with me, saying he did not know how to come to terms with being bisexual and liking men. He could not come out then and certainly could not tell anyone about it now given his current situation. His fiancée was either pregnant or had just given birth to his child. I cannot remember which. We chatted a bit longer and I learned that he really wanted to explore his bisexuality more with his fiancée but did not know how to approach that conversation with her. I do not remember the specifics, but eventually I told him that if he cared about her and they had a good relationship, he should talk with her about his feelings. I could not believe what happened next. He said he would talk to her about everything when he felt it was the right time and when she was ready. Several months went by, maybe even a year, and I did not hear from him at all. Then I learned why. His fiancée went through his phone one day and found our messages. She saw him talk about being bisexual and how he still loved me and that there would always be a place in his heart for me. She did not take that well. They fought constantly, and eventually she unexpectedly took their child and moved halfway across the country, cutting off all contact with him. He had no idea where they had gone, but he knew it was because of our conversations. She said as much. I know it was not my fault, but I definitely felt responsible. He became even more depressed after that, got into drugs, and things went downhill for him. At some point, he married someone else and they had children together. I learned this from a mutual friend. I have not heard from him in years, and I still do not know if he ever gets to see his child. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.